All right, so let's talk about disruptive behavioral disorders and neurodevelopmental disorders. So some of the things we're going to talk about include oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. Just as a brief recap, depressive disorders, adverse childhood experiences, anxiety, substance use disorders, feeding disorders, bipolar disorders, suicidal and non-suicidal self-injury, they all still apply. These are things that we've already talked about, and nothing changes just because it's for a kiddo. So the first disorder we're going to talk about is oppositional defiant disorder. This is characterized by a recurrent pattern of antisocial behaviors. These behaviors are going to be diverted into three main categories: irritability and anger, argumentative and defiant, and vindictive. So our irritable and angry, this is where we're losing our temper, we're easily annoyed, we're resentful. Our argumentative, this is where we challenge our authority figures, we argue with our peers, we get into fights. We deliberately get on everybody's nerves, and we're going to blame others for our mistakes. And then with the vindictiveness, this is where they are spiteful or mean towards others. And then these are broken down into mild, moderate, and severe. Mild meaning they only happen in one setting, such as home, school, work, with their friends. Moderate is going to happen in 2 settings, and severe is going to happen in 3 or more settings. Because usually this happens in the place where they're most comfortable, wherever that may be. Okay, so now we're on intermittent explosive disorder. And this is a recurrent behavioral outburst that is a failure to control aggressive impulses. So this is very different than ODD and conduct disorder because of the shame and regret that comes after it. So it's characterized by this overreaction to regular events, and then they feel very bad about how they reacted. So the remorse that comes with intermittent explosive is the big difference here. We're going to see similar things like verbal aggression, temper tantrums, tirades, arguments, fights, physical aggression, people, property, animals. But the big piece is that it is not um, premeditated, it is impulsive. They are not trying to have a tangible goal with this, like with some of the others. And we're going to move to conduct disorder. So finally, we have conduct disorder. A client who is diagnosed with conduct disorder has a very, very, very high chance of developing antisocial personality disorder later in life. This is going to be seen by aggression towards people and animals, bullying, threatening, intimidating, initiating fights, using a weapon to harm others, theft, destruction of property, lies to get favors or to trick people into giving them things. and then violates serious violations of the rule. They feel that the rules do not apply to them and they can do whatever they want because X, Y, and Z. So very, very similar to antisocial personality disorder. A big piece of this is going to be a lack of remorse or guilt, a lack of empathy. They do not care about their performance at school or work. They don't really show emotion, and it can be mild, moderate, or severe. Before I move on to the other disorders, I want to quickly just talk about two things that may come up, and I just want you to be familiar with, but you don't need to know in too much detail. The first one is pyromania, which is a deliberate and purposeful setting of fires. And kleptomania, which is a recurrent or resistant to of an impulse to steal objects. So those are just two things that you need to know. But in order to have pyromania or kleptomania, it has to be without a diagnosis of conduct disorder or something else. So now we have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This involves the inability of a person to control behaviors that during times that require sustained attention. So there are three main pieces of ADD or ADHD: inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Inattention is where, like we said, we can't pay attention, we can't listen, we can't focus. Hyperactivity is where we can't sit still. We're running around, we're fidgeting, we're climbing all over things. This is why your kids climbing on the back of the sofa. We can't play quietly, or we're going to have excessive talking. And then we have our impulsivity. And this is going to be by not being able to wait turns, constantly interrupting, and acting without the consideration of consequence. So the problem with that is there is a huge, huge, huge risk for injury. If your kid is not paying attention to what's around them or reacting to impulsive behaviors, they're putting themselves at risk for injury because their brain doesn't tell them, I could get hurt if I jump off the steps. They just think, I'm going to be Superman and jump off the steps. So we have to be very careful. Safety is a huge risk for these guys. For our disruptive disorders and impulse control and conduct disorders and ADHD, everything we've talked about up to this, there's some nursing interventions and client teaching, parent teaching that we can bring into it. We're going to use calm, firm, respectful approaches. We're going to model acceptable behavior. Get the child's attention before giving directions and use short and clear explanations. Limit setting, kind of like we have with borderline, not quite to that extreme. We are going to plan for physical activities throughout the day so the child can get out their energy. We're going to assist the parents in developing a reward system and encourage the child to participate. We want to maintain a safe environment. Give the child specific positive feedback when the expectations have been met. Make sure we are not power struggling. And assist with different coping mechanisms along with individual, family, and group therapy. So those are your nursing actions for pretty much all of the disorders we've talked about up to this point. So autism spectrum disorder, it's called a spectrum disorder because it can range from very mild deficits to severe impairments. So the physical difficulties are going to include sensory issues, sleep issues, digestive issues, feeding issues, epilepsy, and/or allergies. That's also what's going to come along with it. With that, the other issues that we're going to have is socialization, fine motor skills, maybe speech. So, and all of this is variant based off of how early the child gets services and how severe their autism spectrum disorder is. Some interventions we can do is the biggest thing we want to do is initiate referrals because early intervention is key. This might be physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, play therapy, any of those things. We want a structured environment. We want to make sure we're getting consistent individualized care. Make sure that we're encouraging verbal communication, and we're going to try and we may have some self-stimulating, which is where we might rock or do repetitive behaviors. And we may, they may have some ritualistic behaviors that we want to look at and make sure that we're giving time for, but as we're helping them, see if we can limit them by providing alternative activities. If there is an emotional trigger, we want to try to identify all of those. And we want to maintain safety, of course. And that is the big things for this chapter.